Morning, everyone. This is Zach Grant with the Urban Ag Connect, University of Illinois Extension, Cook County. Back here at Fangwater Farm again. It's Monday, May 18th. And I want to show everyone my hardening off process. There's not a lot to show, but I wanted to show you a few things and talk about hardening off. A lot of you, I'm sure, probably have your tomatoes and peppers and some of your warm season stuff in, at least your first round in, if you're planting multiple rounds, multiple successions, which you can for certain warm season crops. I usually put in 1 to 2 successions of tomatoes, sometimes 3 if I have a high tunnel or protected culture space to plant an extra early crop in. A lot of the times I actually wait a little bit until, usually the 3rd to maybe 4th week in May to set my first ones out, at least my first tomato plants out. On May 8th, we actually had a fairly late freeze. So it did get down to 28 degrees. And that's one of the latest dates we've had a freeze. So it shows you that you need to be very careful about when you're setting out your warm season crops unprotected in particular. But on that note, all warm season crops, all transplants in general, need to be put through a conditioning or a process called hardening off. And that can take on a variety of forms. When I managed a student farm, we would bring them outside on hay racks and just leave them outside, and if it was going to get too cold, we could bring them back into a pole barn to give them a little bit of protection. But we also put them through some other parts of the process. There's other factors in hardening off. It's not just exposing them to colder temperatures. It's, in general, exposing them conditions they're going to feel out in the field or experience out in the field. That can be temperature. That can also be wind conditions, rainfall, intensity of sunlight, as well as watering and fertilizer or fertility conditions. When we have them in a greenhouse or under a light bench, we're really keeping them under super ideal conditions. So we need to gradually make those conditions less ideal and get them ready to be planted outside and experience what they're going to experience outside. Now, you don't want to push that too far. You can definitely push that too far. Usually the process, if you can make it last about a week before setting out, that's ideal. Depending on the size of container that they're in, they can probably last a little bit longer than that, but planting conditions can vary. We've gotten 5 inches of rain here over the past 3 days, so I'm glad that I push mine back a little bit. I usually start my warm season stuff a little bit later. And I have some of them in larger containers, so that's going to help me delay planting a little bit if need be. So I'm going to show you just my setup here really quick, and I'm going to show you the difference between potting up a tomato in a 4-inch pot versus potting it up in a 2 to 3 inch pot, and you'll really be able to see the difference between that. So let's go ahead and take a look at the setup. Out here on the deck, and I just moved out the first round of warm season transplants. Just have them out here on the patio. Sometimes we move them around in these little racks to make it easy. We actually have quite a few transplants out here. Here's a flat of some perennial herbs and parsley that we haven't planted out yet. There's sage and marjoram. Back there are some leeks and beets and some kale transplants we still haven't gotten to the ground. Way out there, if you can see, I can zoom in on the trailer we have out there. We have a few more alliums that still haven't gotten into the ground. But out here, first round of warm season transplants, and we've been moving these in and out for the past few days, almost a week in fact, to get them ready and gradually ready for outdoor conditions. So that's been definitely lessening the amount of water. This one's actually pretty dried out. You don't want to let them get too dry, but you can definitely reduce the amount of water, cut back on fertility if you're fertilizing them, and definitely exposing them to windier conditions is helpful. These pepper plants, if you don't expose these or get these conditioned right, they're very, very floppy. This can actually start if you have a light bench or you're doing this in a greenhouse. You can start by gently getting some fan wind action onto the transplants, the last couple weeks or so before you start hardening them off or getting them ready for outdoor conditions. So these are really floppy right here. This is Carmen and Escamillo. There's some Italian sweet peppers. They're very floppy, but they're experiencing these outdoor conditions, and probably in another few days they'd really be ready to set out. So, and some of these transplants are a little bit leggier than I'd like. This first round, I started the seeding on April 5th. So we're a little just shy of maybe 2 or 6 weeks. These are about 6-week-old transplants, most everything you see out here. In tomatoes, 5 to 6 weeks as a minimum, depending on container size. Peppers around 6 to 8 weeks. And eggplant about 6 to 8 weeks as well. Here's some eggplants down here for you to see. This damage that you see right here, this is actually from my T5 high fluorescent output propagation lights. Got too close, touched the lights, and that can happen. So I'm a big fan of the T5 lights. They're really superior to T8s and T12s, but if you let them get too close, they can definitely burn. So that's a consideration. What I wanted to really talk about next are these two transplants right here. So I'm really happy with the way that this turned out, to show you the difference between the two. So this is the same variety. This is a determinate variety called Celebration. Let me zoom out a little bit here. So you can really see that there's a difference between these two. Both were started on April 5th, both potted up on, it looks like April 25th, so about 3 weeks later. But one on the left-hand side, this one was potted up into a 4-inch container, and the one on the right was potted up into about a 2.5 to maybe 3-inch container. You can really see the difference. And what you'll note is just the difference in transplant structure. So this one on the left is more of what you want. It's starting to get a little leggy, but you can see it has a very thick stem. It's already starting to sucker out. And the internode length, so the distance between the leaflets here, is very short. And it's just a very healthy, very nice looking transplant. And the one on the right, this will still work, but as you can see, the stem is much skinnier, the internode length is much wider, and it's just a leggier looking transplant. I mean, this will still work. We can take this out of the container, we can lay it down when we plant it out into the field and bury it and kind of make the plant curve upright a little bit. That's okay. But here's the other difference between the two. If you get them in these bigger pots and they're in this, this slightly stockier, more robust conditions, they'll likely actually probably yield a little bit earlier and yield a little bit higher than the transplant on the right. Now I may do some side-by-side comparisons to see if there really is a difference, but that's a general rule of thumb. If you can get them into larger containers and pot them upright and keep them short and stocky like this, when you set them out, they should be off to a much better start than the transplant on the right that you see here, and give you some earlier yields and some higher overall yields. So just wanted to show you kind of the difference between potting up into different size containers. So the limiting factor with these size containers is the bench space or light bench space or greenhouse space that you have. Ideally I would love to pot all of mine up into these 4-inch containers, but there's only so many 4-inch containers that fit in these 10-20 flats. So you can see here in this flat I have a mixture of 4-inch and the 2.5-inch, and I can fit about 15 in a 10-20 with that combination. I can only fit 10 4-inch pots in a 10-20 tray if I just use 4-inch pots. But if given them a little bit more space, I can fit about 24 of the 2-inch pots. So if bench space is a premium, you might be inclined to use the smaller pot so you can fit more in there. Now peppers don't stretch as much as tomatoes do, but tomatoes are notorious for, if you keep them in a super small container, they will stretch, especially these cherries. I mean, you can see these are very, very skinny and stretched out. But we're still going to harden them off, and these should still do okay. We'll bury them out in the bed, and they'll get established and give us some nice fruit. So I just wanted to show you a little bit about the hardening off process, a little bit about containers. And for the next vlog, we'll probably be getting close to planting these out in the field. So we will talk to you all very soon. Hang in there and take care.